what you need to look at is who benefits who more. And if you are driving, thousands of people a day to particular articles, and there's a paywall on that article, and people are signing up to that paywall, you've got to think that the news corporations themselves are actually benefiting more from the traffic that they're getting from Facebook and Google.
All right, take two, since we didn't push record the first time. All right, so everyone on LinkedIn at barbecues is reaching out to me and asking me about this whole, what's this Google stuff going on? And Facebook, obviously, when we recorded the last session, I think Facebook had just made their move. And
I think it was it last Thursday or last Friday?
Yeah.
Late last week.
Late last week. So we're going to record this again because we didn't do a good job the last time, and we're just going to talk about this whole thing from our point of view and hopefully shed some light on things. I guess, what is this whole purpose? Well, why has it been brought out, do you think?
Well, yeah, I mean it's a very contentious topic. There's a ton of different ways you can look at it. I think from our perspective, we've been in the industry for, collectively, we have about 20 plus years of experience between all of us in search marketing. And when you look at why this legislation has been brought out, there's probably three core things that would probably be good for it to achieve, and it doesn't achieve any of those. And this was actually written in the Sydney Morning Herald, which is Fairfax, which is actually one of the companies that are benefiting from this, and even they're, writing pieces about it, scathing it. But this News Media Bargaining Code doesn't do anything for making big tech pay any more tax.
No.
It's not paying any more tax on the money they make here. It doesn't help end users with their privacy. It doesn't help, disguise or mask your online activities from people that stand to make money from it. And it definitely doesn't add to diversity of media in Australia. And that's probably the main point that the government keeps pushing on us, is that, we want journalists to be paid for the content that they're creating. And I think this narrative that journalists need to be paid, and the reason that journalists aren't being paid is because big tech has come in and stolen all of the revenue that old media was generating up until the last decade or so, where there's been a massive decline. So the narrative that we're kind of being sold is that newspapers and journalists are making less money
Google and Facebook.
Because of Google and Facebook.
Yeah.
And I think fundamentally that is incorrect. Obviously, Google has one side of the story, Facebook has another side of the story. There's multiple sides to the story. But what Google says in this case is actually that the decline in revenue through newspapers, etc., is not really due to Google and Facebook. It's due to the loss of online classifieds and that sort of thing. I'm not going to say that's 100% correct, but there's definitely a large element of truth to that.
Okay, let's go back. What was the newspaper full of? It had news, obviously, but how did they actually make money? So, you'd pay, a couple bucks for a paper, or maybe that's what it is now. Maybe it used to be 10 cents or a shilling or whatever. We go back far enough, but they made some money from the revenue of selling the newspaper.
Yep.
But there's lots of newspapers that actually just stick them in your mailbox even when you don't want to. The local ones that I think are all gone now. But when they were around, no one paid for them. So how did they make money? And this is how a lot of newspapers made money, was they had classifieds, they had real estate ads, they had car ads for the dealerships, and then there's general advertising in the paper as well. So when everything went online, so it's not necessarily Google and Facebook, but everything is online in general. You've got classifieds online. Yeah. Okay. So you got eBay came out, as well as Gumtree and all these other ththings that are relevant. You also had online advertising as well. So advertising also moved there, which is why we don't have yellow pages anymore. You don't see yellow pages trying to sue Google
Yeah.
to try and get their business back because they've been replaced. I guess the thing that I want to stress is that the one point that I agree with is that we do need news. News is important. But the problem is this plan doesn't get them money in an actual fair way. That it's not doesn't make any sense. Okay. My biggest issue is they're making in the Google side, it's paying for being what we call an impression, basically just for existing. Okay. And I think Facebook is probably the same. I know a little bit less about that, but this is why Facebook just took down their pages, because they're saying we want to be paid for the page to exist. And both those big tech giants stress a pretty important note, which is you're not paying to be there. In fact, like Facebook's case, you actually created that page and you actively post to it. So they're both arguing that you get free advertising to your site. So this brings up the bigger case of how do journalists keep making money? Now the issue is Fairfax or News Corp, I don't know which ones. They owned Domain, which was property, and news.com.au.
Yeah, so
not news, realestate.com.au.
Fairfax is Domain. Realestate.com is News Corp.
Thank you, my fact checker. And we have and we also have the other one, Car Sales, that was owned by one of them as well, and still is, as far as I'm aware.
Yeah, I think it may be.
But upper. So obviously the journalists don't get any cut of, like, the Sydney Morning Herald journalist doesn't get any money that comes from that.
Yeah, they're all separate. They've segmented all the businesses.
They've all done that. So this is why the only money you can make from a newspaper is any idiot that still spends money for a newspaper ad.
Yeah.
Okay. And the subscriptions.
Yeah.
And I think that's the bigger issue, that they have to figure out how to make people want to pay for it. Now, Google's got this idea, which we'll see how it works, which is what they're actually making progress. You can see how much grown up Google is versus Facebook with how they handled it.
Google News Showcase is what
Google News Showcase, which is not new. It wasn't brought out because of all this drama. That it's been out or in a plan for over a year or something like that.
It was expedited because of the drama, but it was planned anyway.
Yes.
It was,
and that's a way for journalists to get some money for Google to show news and et cetera, et cetera. So it would be good for, I guess, Facebook to create something like that too, to, I guess, make it simpler for if you literally just want to go get news online from multiple sources, which is what we want now. This is why digital's better, is I don't want to, like, we all know that media is very biased, right? But you can tune your opinion to the bias. So you can go, well, I wouldn't mind reading this article here because I know that they're biased for it and these guys are biased against it. So I can sort of figure out this medium.
Yeah, and I don't think, realistically, a lot of people don't understand that and think like that. I think
maybe
there's a lot of, I think there's two sort of opposing views and two opposing forces here. The argument that the government is making, and, News Corp and Fairfax, and on that side, on the government side, what the argument they're making is that Google and Facebook show news or snippets of news, and they create a good experience for the user because they're able to see and find news on their platform, and therefore the user spends more time on their platform, and then they use that information to serve ads to them based on their interests, based on what they're currently reading about, what they're currently looking for. They'll serve different ads to them based on their online sort of persona. Google and Facebook in this case, like, mainly they'll share the headline and a snippet, but they won't share the full article. But I guess the argument in this case is that because Google and Facebook have that news on their platform, that they're getting sort of user engagement to some extent. And there might also be people that sort of skim read and don't actually click through to that content. Like, that's a possibility. But when you look at the argument of who needs who more and who adds value to who more, it's undoubtedly true that Google or Facebook probably do get some extent of benefit from having news on their platform. You can't deny that. But what you need to look at is who benefits who more? And if you are driving, thousands of people a day to particular articles, and there's a paywall on that article, and people are signing up to that paywall, you've got to think that the news corporations themselves are actually benefiting more from the traffic that they're getting from Facebook and Google. There's some things that Google does where it takes snippets of articles and sort of discourages people from clicking through to the actual content.
Yeah.
That's a bit of a different story.
That's my argument. Like, just because we work with Google doesn't mean we actually are fanboys and agree with everything they do. Like, structured snippets in the organic listings is something I have a love-hate relationship with. And we'll talk about it more in another chat. But, like, my perfect analogy is if you had a weather website that was full of ads, right? You would have been making so much money from people searching Melbourne weather. If you were number one organically for Melbourne weather, you would be getting, especially in Melbourne, because it changed every 10 seconds, so much traffic every day. You would have been getting so much revenue from ads. And now they've got their structured snippets, which pulls that data and spits it out on there. So you don't even, unless you want to go and look at the full forecast, but even sometimes it's got that. So that's where I'm like, that's Google actually crippling someone's ad revenue. So that's also, some people like, they're doing this in Sweden or something like that, or where the government brought in a law to make them pay for it. That was the structured snippets, because that's where you're showing an article, or at least a large chunk of it, without that click to the website.
Yeah. And I think so. So obviously, there's the view the government has, which is Facebook and Google are benefiting massively from this, so they need to pay their share. There's the view that I guess Google and Facebook have, which is we're actually benefiting you quite a lot. And then there's other forces at play, mainly being sort of the emergence of new media, things like YouTube channels, vloggers, that a lot of people are starting to turn to actually find, current events, and they're starting, they do deep dives on particular topics. And so there's new media versus old media. Old media, undoubtedly, as you can tell because of the name, is in massive decline, and the revenue that they get is also in massive decline. And a lot of that is actually due to businesses that Fairfax and News Corp have sold off and are still under the banner of Fairfax and News Corp. So
it's also the diversification of where we get our news, like you said. So I'm not going to read an article about what the new iPhone is in Herald Sun, because it's like, I can get a much more quality review of that probably sooner
you can.
From media on YouTube. Someone that just does tech.
And you've got, I know myself personally, if I'm looking for an unbiased opinion on something, I'll take whatever search I'm making and add in, Whirlpool or Reddit or something after it, so I can go and look at forums and things that individuals themselves have written. And individuals themselves now have a platform, even though they're not necessarily monetized. And that's so different to 15 or 20 years ago, when if something was published on the web 15 or 20 years ago, it was normally because they had some sort of merit, or they were some sort of journalist, or they had some sort of money behind them, because it wasn't exactly all that cheap to sort of...
What I don't get is how are the journalists not making money? And I'd like to look into it more, because like you look at a YouTube reviewer, right? You've got one that just does Apple stuff, and you got one that just does, I don't know, drone stuff, and then you got one that just does tech and blah blah blah. Like there's all these people that niche to one brand, and like they're making, they got like millions of subscribers. They get, like, you look at the amount of views they're getting, that sort of stuff. So why is it just that is the whole model broken, and does that need to be reevaluated?
Well, I think so. Like as you said, when you read the newspaper 30 years ago, you physically went and bought the newspaper. And so, I mean, I don't know how much the average person would have spent on a newspaper, but a lot of people would have had subscriptions, and they would have come and thrown the paper on the lawn, and that was just a recurring revenue model. But now we have access to so much more information at our fingertips, and you've got to look at as well the demographics of the readership of either Fairfax or News Corp. It's a lot of Gen X and Gen Y are not going to start taking up subscriptions for Fairfax and News Corp. There's a lot of sort of negative bias towards those companies, in that sort of those generations, and B, they've just grown up watching YouTube and Facebook and consuming new media, and so it's a demographic, I think, that is, or it's sort of a concept that is just in decline.
It's a natural evolution, and asking and getting. Like, obviously, news is on the decline with where they're making money, especially directly from, even with their having the other sold off their other assets of digital forms. You can't then just pull your buddy in the government to try and create a law to get you some money for doing nothing.
Well, you shouldn't be able to, but in this case, they have.
But that's at the end of the day, what they're asking for isn't actually beneficial. So this is what I want. I want government to stop trying to help out his rich billionaire buddy that does newspapers that are not used anymore, and maybe help us out by figuring out, well, if Google is earning billions of dollars in Australia and only paying this much because the law allows them to, then fix it the same way you guys brought out the law they had any dollars had to do GST. Well, now do more than GST, do income like that, and that would then do everyone. Every big tech company is doing it, let alone all the other ones that have other locations. Like, that helps them. It doesn't help with the control they have, or try and build something that can compete. It just seems like everything the government puts their hands on is worse than private enterprise.
Digitally,
everything. Like, our internet, if it was all done by one private company, it would have been done really well. But then you got a monopoly, which you're not allowed to have.
I think, look, without getting too political, having sort of interests and sort of these networks which are just sort of implanted within the political structure of Australia are definitely part of what has caused this. But I agree. I mean, one of the big things that we should be doing is taxing large multinational tech corporations more, because
it's the same percent that we all get charged.
And technically,
because they're not evil for dodging it. I would if I could too.
I mean, technically they do pay company tax rate on their profits. The problem is that they'll send
money wherever,
$1 billion offshore to Singapore or Ireland to pay down a loan or something there, and there's nothing to stop them sending money offshore to tax havens, and that's just the way it is. And we also need to be fostering a more diverse media environment in this country. And this law, most importantly, this is the thing that annoys me. This is the thing that annoys me most.
Hold on. That's my alarm.
This is the thing that annoys me most about this law, is this law
helps
actually does the opposite when it comes to driving, a diverse media landscape. There's, within the legislation, or the proposed legislation in the News Media Bargaining Code, a company has to be turning over more than 150K a year in order for it to be eligible to bargain with either Facebook or Google and get payments from them directly. So who do you think those people are? They're small, independent publishers that aren't going to be swayed by the interests that the people that are paying them would have, like Fairfax and News Corp, who are, who are biased towards promoting the interests of the people that own them.
Yeah, it gets all political then.
So you have to look at it and say, well, what is this going to do? Well, it's going to instantly sort of pull the rug out from underneath the small independent publishers who are out there, and it's going to prop up the large monopoly media corporations which already dominate the landscape in Australia. So it's going to actually squash media diversity much more than has ever happened in the last 10 or 20 years. But they've disguised it under this neat little package of actually paying journalists what they're worth, and media is an important part of every functioning democracy. Well, it is, but this law, whether it's by design or whether it's just incompetence, I think does the complete opposite of fostering media diversity.
It has to be incompetent because, to pay for an impression is not it's like that's not how Google works. And if you allow it with the media, then anyone's going to jump on it. I should go, hey Google, you need to pay me because you index my site. It's funny because everyone out there is chasing their tail to try and figure out how to get their site indexed by Google.
Yeah.
So you can't say, oh, Google's taking it. It's like, no. Every media outlet is either paying someone or hiring someone, doing whatever they can to make sure they show up in Google and as high as possible. So everyone was happy to play the game until they figured, oh, maybe we can find a way to get money.
Yeah, maybe we can cheat.
Top. So I guess end of the day, it is broken. Looks like Google's actually started negotiations with a lot of the media, so that's probably going to fizzle out on their side.
Yeah.
Facebook did what we wanted Google to do, to be honest. Everyone's like, well, why doesn't Google just get rid of it? And it's like, well, that'd be a PR disaster. And we can see Facebook's copping it with a lot of sob stories from people. The ironic thing is no one gets to see those sob stories because no news is on Facebook,
right.
which is where everyone gets their news.
It's now just comedian news channels on Facebook. Which
but what's good is I've still been seeing important things because I don't follow news for important things. I follow, like, if I want to know about, like what's going on with coronavirus, something like that, you follow the government.
Yeah.
They've got like 3 or 4 different department things that, and I'm sure others are doing the same, but like, you don't need to follow 7 News to know what's going on. You can follow for certain things anyway.
Yeah.
What needs to be sorted out is this whole thing so that we don't lose kind of those, people that figure stuff out that wasn't, black and white. Like news on like, oh, what's going on with coronavirus, like, you can't not find that. The government can give that out. What we need is a bunch of people asking questions and investigating, not just recycling the same stuff we already know. So hopefully Facebook figures something out, because what they've done isn't a long-term solution. And it's just not a good look. But
look, it's not a good look on Facebook as well. And I mean, you look at Facebook and Google, and undoubtedly having a monopoly in any market is incredibly bad for that market. I think Facebook and Google, both of those companies have done incredibly evil things, and both of them are massive companies. And whether they are, systematically evil or not, they are just very
they just
big.
Got too big. Where eventually you're doing harm to some percent of the public.
And so in this case, I don't think either side is necessarily, inherently good and one side is inherently bad. But there needs to be more.
I'm just stuck at this crossroads where I keep the analogy in my head that I'm sure blacksmiths were all pissed off with Ford, and, like when cars became normal, right? So, like, but we still need news. So that's what I'm saying. Like, there's something that needs to be figured out. And is it just that you can't have big news? Will it just become that you got a bunch of small ones? Like what's happening with TV? I haven't had an antenna on my TV for nearly a decade.
Yeah. It's you're right. Like it's a disruption of an industry with a product offering that is better. Not necessarily better, but a different product offering that's coming in. I don't think media in a traditional sense, or Fairfax or News Corp newspapers need to die necessarily. They just need to adapt.
Well, we need news because they do a lot of things that need to be done.
And in this case, I'm not actually against Google or Facebook paying any money for having that content on their platform, and I think Google News Showcase,
especially in that in that premium situation where you're going there and you get to look at all of it in one spot, like it's the Netflix of news. Yeah,
but I think the big issues with it is that Facebook and Google, like Google is now basically paying protection money to the Australian government because they basically want to prop up these old media organisations which typically write nice things about them. And in this case, it just doesn't do anything for actually creating a diverse media landscape. No. You need to be able to fund and create new independent sources of media. And what, in a sense, what the government has said is absolutely correct, but their meaning behind it and the way that they've done it isn't. So diverse media landscape is incredibly important, but it's also important to have a diverse competition landscape, with Facebook and Google. So, typically, I guess, this side of the government is all about sort of free market we'll let the market decide. We're not going to sort of intervene and that sort of stuff until
we
the market
decide we're
becomes
going
too
to.
free, and then
Yeah.
they sort of intervene. And in this case, I wouldn't be pissed off if it was, actually supporting. I'm not against Facebook or Google paying money to news publishers.
No.
What I am against is Facebook and Google not paying money to small independent news publishers, because that's just incredibly biased.
Yeah.
That's what is incredibly annoying.
And
I'm pretty sure this new showcase, there's no revenue limit on what they earn. It's literally just reaching out to Google to get on that program, and provide your news, and then go to some sort of auction or whatever.
Yeah, well, I mean, you I mean, as far as I know, you can negotiate with Google regardless of how big your company is. So
you could be a small micro news group with like 3 journalists that decide to run your own
and
thing.
whether that's by design or not, I don't know.
No.
But it needs to be. There's nothing wrong with having, I guess, opinions on one side of the political spectrum. That's fine. That's democracy. But preventing any or giving it a major advantage to the big monopolistic existing players without allowing new players to come through, that's a big flaw, in my opinion.
I guess we're circling a bit. But yeah, to wrap up, I guess the proposed law was not what it's being said it is. It is way too biased to benefit a very small, large media demographic. And we don't have to worry about Google leaving. They're going to negotiate their way out of this. Facebook just did what they're going to do. So Facebook won't leave. They're just doing what, they're just like, well, we'll just remove it then. So we'll figure out what happens there.
Yeah.
And but it is a very interesting thing. And the one thing I like to highlight, because if Google did have to leave, we said last time it'd be devastating the small business. So this is something, it brings up the conversation that if you are a small business or any size, really, you need to diversify where your customers come from. And unfortunately, a lot of it is usually small players.
Yeah.
But it's always been like that.
Yeah.
Before Google, it's probably all from TV or radio. But it just reminds us that it's going from one big beast to another, and we have to make sure we're always keeping on track of where we are relying on, where all our eggs are in what basket. So I don't want to keep going because I have no idea how long that's gone for, but hopefully that helped. If you have any questions, pop them in the comments below, and we look forward to hearing what you guys have to say. Thank you.
Thanks, guys.